But there was this bill that had to do with human trafficking of minors. And the bill would have classified it as a quote unquote serious felony. Now, apparently, there was this, I think it was the Oversight Committee. They initially said no, they wouldn't pass it. And it was put forward by a Republican. And people were like, why are you voting against this? So give us a little bit of the background on this bill and what actually happened with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was just the latest effort to try to classify human trafficking, specifically human trafficking of children, as a serious felony in California. There's been many efforts to do this in the past, including by Democrats. And actually, the bill that was at issue recently was authored primarily by a Republican, but it had passed the entire California State Senate with unanimous bipartisan support. So not a single Democrat voted against it. And then it came to the state assembly, and it came up in the Assembly Public Safety Committee, which has kind of been notorious in the past for killing bills that, I sort of see as pretty common sense. And we've talked about some other ones on the show, including classifying domestic violence as a violent crime. And so the issue that came up was, what does it mean to call human trafficking of children a serious felony? It is. So adding it to the list of crimes that are considered serious in California Penal Code means that it counts as a strike under California's 3 strike. That means that if you repeat a defense considered to be serious 2 or 3 times, you're going to get longer and longer sentences in prison, and it's going to be harder for you to earn good conduct credit rates at a faster rate and basically shorten that sentence a lot. And so I think that, the thing that's interesting is that when it was in the Senate, this bill would have originally classified human trafficking of anyone as a serious crime. But there were concerns about, that how that could lead to over-incarceration and the disproportionate incarceration of people of color. And so they narrowed that to human trafficking of children. And then came up in the Assembly Public Safety Committee, and those same concerns about over-incarceration and the idea that, sometimes traffickers force victims to traffic other victims. And there was concern that some of those victims might be, imprisoned as well. And so all of that led to Democrats on the committee not voting on the bill at all. They abstained from the vote, and so it didn't have enough to pass. Then there was all this uproar, and it went back, and they did pass it.
Now, how many Democrats, when you say they abstained, how many Democrats are we talking about here? All of them?
There were 6 Democrats on the committee, and in the initial vote, all 6 Democrats abstained from the vote. There are 2 Republicans on the committee, and those Republicans did vote to advance it. But there was the 6 abstentions from the Democrats.
So now, obviously, there was pressure because there was uproar. It kind of seemed like if there was anything people can agree on, it's the child trafficking is wrong. It's serious. And if you do it, you should be, thrown away. Now, I understand that Governor Newsom also threw his opinion into this, and that also might have helped move things towards it passing, correct?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So the day after this vote happened, it kind of just blew up on social media. Everyone was kind of confounded by the idea that you would say that human trafficking of a child is not serious. I mean, I think just linguistically and morally and ethically, it's very difficult to kind of justify that sort of standpoint. The governor was asked about the bill directly, and he said, I actually talked with the author, who is Republican State Senator Shannon Grove of Bakersfield, and we want to try to find a solution to this. There's actually now a new speaker in the state assembly, Robert Rivas. He replaced Anthony Rendon, and, Rendon was very notorious in some ways for not getting involved in those types of disputes and really allowing the leaders of certain committees to be pretty strong in the stances that they took and kind of stand on their own with whatever that was and not really interfering with that. And it seems like Rivas is going to take a little bit more of a hands-on approach, because he also said at an event that day that he also wanted to find a solution to this issue, and that, it's something that is very serious. And so I think with both the governor and Rivas getting involved and basically siding with the Republican, as well as all of the very public pressure that the committee was receiving. They moved right away to have another hearing, and they just really quickly, it was like, I think, a 2-minute long hearing, they voted to pass the bill.
Well, I mean, because it does seem obvious. Now, the reason why we're also talking about this, Emily, is because it really is a snapshot of California state politics right now. California is a supermajority, and Democrats hold all the power basically in California. Pisses off a lot of people, especially if you're a Republican in the state of California. It's also a very good excuse for anything that's wrong in the state, right? If there's homelessness, if there's crimes, well, it's the Dems' fault because there's no Republicans in power. What does this kind of show regarding maybe an erosion, perhaps, of what could possibly be a supermajority? I mean, do you foresee Republicans here in the state of California using an issue like this and how absurd it was to vote against it as a way of like, hey, maybe it's better to have some checks and balances in a state, especially of this size?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that vote was very out of touch with the average person. And I think that Democrats, they kind of unnecessarily gave Republicans power that they really shouldn't have, and they really didn't need to. This is an issue that was bipartisan in the Senate. So why did the Assembly Public Safety Committee take such a different stance than the entire rest of the state Senate? And, in my column, I kind of argued that Republicans are so insignificant in California that anytime they receive a victory, it's really not because of their own self. It's because Democrats sabotaged themselves.
Right.
And they did this on the criminal justice issue because, that vote was kind of so out of the blue and so out of touch with, I think, how the average person would perceive that crime, that the Republicans just slammed them on that messaging, and they got the attention of the governor, they got the attention of the press, and they secured a victory for now because they reversed themselves and the bill advanced. And, also on the issue of housing, we're seeing Democrats take, pretty ideologically, like pure approaches to some of these things that do not account for the reality. And so, the idea that you oppose over incarceration, if you take that to its logical extreme, you're not going to put people in jail, even people that are committing the most egregious crimes. The average person is going to have problems with that. On housing, there are Democrats that are so tied to environmental and labor groups that they oppose the construction of housing except under the most narrow circumstances. Even though we clearly have a housing crisis in California and an affordable housing crisis in California. And so what ended up happening was that Democrats, in my opinion, stupidly gave Republicans the opportunity to be the votes that actually got a very key housing bill across a key committee. And they didn't actually need to have that happen because if the Republicans are so insignificant that their votes don't matter, except for when Democrats don't vote on certain bills because of these kind of divorced from reality stances. And then Republicans can say, oh, we're the ones that are helping solve the housing crisis.
Yeah.
We're the ones that are understanding that, lower income communities of color are the ones who need these affordable houses here in California. We're supporting that. Democrats aren't. We're the ones saying that child traffickers should be in prison. Democrats aren't. And I think that if Democrats don't kind of take a step back and look at how their ideas are kind of being filtered into reality, they do risk losing some voters who are just going to be honestly kind of confused by the stance of, we support victims, we support, low income communities, and then not really following policies that are actually achieving those ends.
Absolutely. Now, the thing, the debate I always have, and I'm sure that you have it as well. You're on the editorial board. I'm sure you get all kinds of comments from people on both sides of the political aisle. The conversation I have with my conservative friends in California goes something like this. It's like, I'm willing to debate policy with you. The problem is I don't trust the Republican Party to support and to fight for California ideals. So when we talk about, oh, we can be on the same page for this, we can be on the same page for that. Is there such a thing as a California Republican? Because I think the worry is once a Republican gets in there or too many Republicans get in there, they're no longer a California Republican. They become more of a national Republican, which scares the bejesus out of people because we see what happens when Republicans are in power. And I would argue it really, truly goes against what Californians stand for. So how do we fix that?
100%, Nikki. And I think that something that was really interesting about this and kind of underscored the very issue that you're talking about was that after this child trafficking bill thing, where clearly it seemed like Republicans were kind of in the right on that issue, there was a vote to actually repeal the language of Proposition 8 from the California state constitution, which essentially says, marriage is only between a man and a woman, and essentially suggests that, gay marriage is not something that California voters support. That may have been true, even a decade ago or 15 years ago. But I think the view on gay marriage among our country and also among Californians in general is shifted dramatically. And I think if you ask the average person, do you support a person's right to marry who they love? They're going to say yes. And so there was a vote to remove this language from the Constitution, and it's going to go on to the 2024 ballot. So voters will have a chance to weigh in on it. The point is that some Republicans actually abstained from that vote, kind of suggesting that supporting gay marriage is not something that they're going to come out. Maybe they're neutral on it, but they're not going to come out and say, yes, I think voters should have the opportunity to vote on this. And I had this very same discussion with some folks where I'm like, Republicans make good arguments in California on things like housing and on crime. But when it comes to social issues like, like gay marriage or the issues surrounding transgender rights, things surrounding abortion, they are themselves out of touch with I think the average California voter. And we saw that because voters really strongly last year supported an amendment to enshrine the right to abortion in the California state constitution. And so it really does not make sense for Republicans in California to double down on, things that are anti-abortion or anti-gay rights, because that's just not going to fly in California. And so I think that if they want to try to have success here, they're going to have to kind of walk back some of those stances. I do think there are models for this. I mean, in the election last year, Lon He-Chen, who was running for California state controller, he really carved out a path as I think what a California Republican could look like. He came out and said he supports abortion. He supports a woman's right to choose. He denounced former President Donald Trump and said that he, believes the elections were fairly decided. Right. And so I think that those are the types of views that if Republicans are going to have any traction in California, and if they are going to kind of win back voters' trust, they're going to have to address those issues, because I do think those social questions are a really big reason why many Californians don't support Republicans, and they're going to vote for Democrats, even if Democrats are voting on some of these things that are a little bit, iffy.
Exactly. And I mean, even though you obviously mentioned, some that want to appeal to the California voter, I don't trust them. And that's just something in me. Like, you see, what happened with the U.S. Supreme Court and what people say and what people do when they're actually in power, or even if you vote a certain way while you're a California lawmaker, if you have aspirations nationally, you might flip your script. And so it's the erosion of trust, I think, for me personally, with the Republican Party that makes me sorry, I got to vote Democrat, because when push comes to shove, I would love to have more checks and balances on my Democratic lawmakers here. I would love to hear different points of view. But when you start taking away my reproductive freedom, when you start talking about taking away the right for people to marry, etc., you lose me as a Californian, and there's no way of getting me back. And so it's frustrating. And I thought that, your article was a great example. And again, if you guys want to read it, it's in the show notes, because that's all I kept thinking was, logically, this makes sense. But our political divide, not just across the country, but here in California, makes it so we can't even agree on the most obvious things.